Good morning, I'm Pastor Jason. Today we're looking at Baptist Catechism Question number 29. That question asks, how does Christ perform the office of a priest? Christ performs the office of a priest by once offering himself as a sacrifice to satisfy divine justice and to reconcile us to God, and by making continual intercession for us before God. So Christ did several things to operate in the office of a priest. And so we'll look at the Bible and see what it says about this. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 24 states this, who his own self bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, being dead to sin, should live to righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. Of course, we know from reading the Old Testament that the high priest would offer sacrifices. Priests would offer sacrifices for the people. Jesus offered his own self as sacrifice for our sins. He bore our sins in himself when he hung on the cross. He offered himself for that. So in that way, he was operating as a priest. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 17 states this, wherefore in all things it behooved him to be made like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people. It would have been a relatively easy thing for God just to wipe the slate clean for every man from his position in glory. After all, God is all powerful. He can do whatever he wants to. But God, from eternity past, decided that he would take on flesh, dwell among us, live a life as a human, and then he would sacrifice himself on the cross for our sins. That was a much more difficult task, laying aside his glory, taking on the humiliation of being a man, and then living that perfect life among such sinful people who hated him, and then being crucified by those who rejected him. Jesus did this. It behooved him to be made like his brethren so that he could be a merciful and faithful high priest. In doing so, Jesus was fulfilling that office of a priest. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25 states this, and we'll start with 24. But this man, because he continues forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come to God by him, seeing that he ever liveth to make intercession for them. Not only was it necessary for Jesus to die on the cross and be buried, but he also rose again. And because he ever liveth, the former high priest Saul died, they passed on their priesthood to someone else. Jesus lives forever. So therefore, he is able to save to the uttermost those who come to God by him. He always living to make intercession for us. Even now, Jesus is doing that. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28 states this, So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him he shall appear the second time without sin unto salvation. In the Old Testament, there were many sacrifices, and they were offered on a continual basis. And there have been millions of sheep and goats and bulls and birds that have been offered to atone for sin. But only Jesus offered himself once for all. He didn't have to offer himself again and again and again. His blood was sufficient to cover all sin of all humanity for all time. And so those who come to God by him, he is able to do that. He was offered once for the sins of the many, and unto them that look for him, he shall appear a second time without sin for judgment. This is the reason Jesus will come. The second time will be for judgment. The first time he came to bear the sins of many. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2 says, And walk in love, as Christ has also loved us, and has given himself for us for an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor. The sacrifice of Christ, willingly offered on the cross, was done so as a sweet and fragrant aroma of pleasing sacrifice to God. It pleased God for Jesus as a man to die on that cross. It pleased God for God to come down, take on flesh, and offer himself. Walk in love, just like Christ did. Christ operated as the priest. He fulfilled that office. He gave himself as an offering. He gave himself as that offering. Romans chapter 8, verse 34 tells us this: who is he that condemns? It is Christ that died. Yes, rather, that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. So the priests would atone for sin with the sacrifice, and God would forgive. Who is the one that condemns? And you and I can't really condemn anybody. Every man is already under condemnation. But in the final analysis, when we stand before the Lord, who will condemn? Condemning will be done by Jesus. Jesus who offered himself. Who is he that condemns? It is Christ that died. Yes, rather, he's risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, and he makes intercession for us. He's making intercession, fulfilling that office of a priest. Question 29 of the Baptist Catechism asks this: how does Christ perform the office of a priest? Well, Christ performs the office of a priest by once offering himself as a sacrifice to satisfy divine justice, to reconcile us to God, and by making continual intercession for us before God.